Astronomy compels the soul to look upward and lead us from this world to another. A quote from Plato. For thousands of years, space has been our place to question our own existence. It has been a source of religion and even science, especially now more than ever. But now we're at a critical point with our relationship with space. On October 4th, 1957, the USSR launched the first man-made object into space, beginning what would be now known as the space race, a competition on who could get to the moon first. And even though this race has been won, we still launch hundreds of satellites into space each year. Not as much for military purposes now, but for communication, GPS, and scientific research. We have now about 6,542 active and inactive satellites in space. That sounds like a lot, huh? Well, this is going to grow even more, especially with a now new competition between the US and China. A space race that is now for control of the moon. Places such as SpaceX and Boeing launch more satellites into space more than military. This is now not just a race between two political powers, but now a race between our limited time we have now set for us. On what, you may ask? On our ability to gaze into the sky with no obstruction. Our ability to be able to go into space freely with no form of fear of anything else hitting any structures we may set up there. To first get an issue on what is really going on right here, I first need to explain what's going on in the research side of this, more of which I guess is more of the optical astronomy, and the more political side of it, the tensions between the US and China more of, which I will go into briefly, explain, and hopefully not try getting too deep into the politics of it and try to avoid any of that. So, to begin this off, we'll first go over on the new space race that China and the US have started with one another. About 20 years ago, China started to launch more satellites into space. This would cause the US to become more fearful of China becoming more powerful in space than them and limiting the ability for anyone else to go into space. During this, the US was fearful of this. Okay, just scratch that out, Jacob. Just keep going. So, with the US and China starting to become more and more conflicted with one another, the US felt So with the US and China becoming more conflicted, with China and the US becoming more and more conflicted with one another, the US thought it was necessary to begin the making of Space Force, So what's the issue? So what's the concern for astronomers, or just anyone else wanting to observe the skies? Well, that's the other part I have for you. You see, with the launching of more and more satellites into space, we get the issue of what we call satellite constellations, or satellites such as like Starlink. They're these long strands of satellites that can obscure the vision in the sky or obscure anyone just trying to take a gaze into the night. This affects people who observe the stars for more religious purposes, or astronomers just trying to observe the stars. And I'll try to keep this quick on trying to explain this stuff. I had to read 120 pages of documents explaining this entire issue, so I'm going to try explaining it to y'all in the most quick way possible. I won't be able to get everything in this, but if you're ever interested in wanting to read more, I'll put the documents in the link below. So, to go on about this, astronomers, when they're observing the sky, need to observe a very tiny part in the sky. They also have a very limited time to observe in the sky, because several astronomers want to use this other telescope, this ground-based telescope. So, if you missed your shot, you missed your shot. The issue of what has been addressed by one of the TTU professors was that we need to find ways to mitigate the issue. What are some of these mitigations that we can use? Well, the American Astronomy Society came together and tried figuring out what are some of the best mitigations to lessen these satellites into space that can obscure an astronomer's view. These include launching fewer or no LEO satellite constellations, which I explained earlier what they are. This is about the only option that is completely foolproof, but more likely than not going to happen. The other idea is to deploy satellites at an orbital altitude no higher than 600 kilometers. The reason being is because the higher up a satellite is, the longer it takes for it to go across the sky, making it harder for them to observe anything in the sky. They also have the idea of darkening a satellite in their albedo, which is just fancy for its reflection. Which is just fancy for a fancy word for saying it reflects, it's metal that it reflects light off of, and making it darker so it does not reflect as much light, making it easier for them to just basically edit it out. The fourth one they use is to have the ability to control a satellite's altitude, but this is more likely not going to happen. The reason why they want to try doing this is that when a satellite has a different position in the sky or higher or whatnot, the sun will reflect larger and larger beams depending on its altitude. This is one of the ideas that they had. More likely not going to happen. It's the fifth mitigation would be to remove or mask satellite trails in their effects and images, which someone has come up with the idea to use. It's called the Takashi method, which just is basically they combine a bunch of other programs and everything together to get this other image. It's a long process. I will not be going into it because I'm not the kind of person to explain it, and y'all don't want that. This last one is to just avoid satellite trails with the use of accurate programming for these. There's another word for it, and I won't be using it. Like I said, you can look into the documents that I can put down there below if you're more interested in this. And those are the ideas that they had for mitigations. Will these all probably work out? We don't know. Time will tell. But they're ideas nonetheless. Ideas that we need to try getting out and putting out there for people to use.